a drive to diversify the economy. MedTech is one of the highest value areas that you can work in and create products that you can export around the world. There's more venture capital that is going into MedTech right now in Canada. And there's also a really good support system and an evolving and developing support system of incubators and accelerators, including the program that is running this workshop. So all of these things did not exist when I started my company 17 years ago. Coming back from Switzerland and working there in the industry, the ecosystem in Canada at that time was still quite young. So now there's a lot more supports. There is also programs such as the Creative Destruction Lab, which has a MedTech, I believe, division in Toronto. There's also, more support organizations like Starfish, really large, experienced MedTech service providers that can support your company. So it's a good time to start a MedTech company in Canada. And Jeff, just let me know if you can hear me okay, if that's coming through clear.
Yes, we can. And now we have the slides.
Okay, great.
Let me know when you'd like to advance the slides.
Sure. So you can go to slide 3. I'm just talking about why you might want to consider starting a MedTech company. The second is impact. So, helping patients is probably the most impactful thing that you can do as an individual, either in the healthcare profession as a doctor or a nurse. So you can help one patient at a time. But if you're a successful MedTech company and you solve an unmet clinical need, you can impact millions of patients a year. And that's just a very rewarding career. And very satisfying, for your career path. The other part is if you are a builder, if you really liked Lego growing up, you like to break things down and build them back up and actually create something. Creating any startup is very rewarding because you're actually, I'm still on the third slide there, Rob. So you get to create a company that you want to work for, and you get to create, the best company that you could possibly work for, your own, and build something that will last beyond yourself. So, can you hear me there, Rob?
Yeah, sorry, is it not advancing?
It's good now. You're just a slider 2 ahead.
Oh, okay, right. Slide 3. Are we good?
I think he's just frozen. That's why he's not talking.
Wow.
This is crazy.
Apologies to Chad.
Yeah.
Well, he's just really still.
That could be Drew. He's gonna go and come back, I'm sure. Or maybe not. Maybe the connection is gone.
Yeah, apologies, everyone. I guess let's give him a few more minutes, see if we can sort this out. I'll email him. He's back. Oh, he's frozen.
Well, time is marching on. We nearly had him in person.
Yep.
I'm back, I hope.
Oh,
there
here
we
he
go.
is.
Okay. Sorry about all this, Chad.
Yeah, no problem.
I'll be sure.
It does happen.
Slides look okay?
Yeah, I'm still on the why you might want to start a MedTech company.
Okay. Is that what you're seeing?
No, it's still loading here. So
Oh, well, we see slide 3 clearly.
okay. Well, I'll just speak into the abyss here then, as long as you can actually hear me. That's fine. So so I don't know when I cut off, but basically I was talking about creating a company that you want to work for and creating something that lasts beyond yourself. So I don't know if you captured that or not. The fourth point is that you're all quite early in your careers, and maybe you have worked in industry, maybe you have yet to start your career and actually worked in large companies and seen medical products in use. But I can tell you, as of now in 2022, there is still very large unmet clinical needs in almost every area of medicine. And MedTech is just slower. It's slower to adopt technology. And I've been traveling the last few weeks, and I've gone to a few conferences, and I walked around the floor and looked at the level of innovation in various product areas, and things are just still not that advanced. And you look at very many areas of medicine, and there's still a lot of innovation that's needed, because the information that those products were based on is quite limited. And so there's still an opportunity to innovate, but also a need. So we need to do better in many areas of medicine, and that is an opportunity. And that's the final point, which is in terms of, it's not only a good thing to have a MedTech company create a solution for patients. That's wonderful that you can address an unmet need, but it's also a great way to build value and capture that value. So MedTech as a sector has higher profit margins, higher salaries. The products are more exportable or export oriented. So it's a great way to also generate wealth and then share that wealth. And I strongly believe that that should be a core component of what is being done in Canada. We have a very innovative medical system here, a lot of amazing ideas being generated. So we're good at creating the value, but we need to be better at actually capturing the value and building those companies in Canada. Still good, Jeff?
Absolutely.
Okay, we can go to the next slide. It'll be an adventure. See if we can get to the next slide. Okay, so that's my view of why you should start a MedTech company. You might think that you don't have enough experience or that you're too young, but it takes a long time, so it's always good to start early. And you know, there's a few ways you can start. So the first thing I would suggest is read the book The Art of the Start from Guy Kawasaki. It's a really excellent book. It's a generic sort of how to start a startup, but many of the elements apply to MedTech. And it's a great framework. I read that book about 5 years after starting my company, Halifax Biomedical. And the reason why I was able to survive and build and continue to run the company after 5 years was most of the things that were in that book. So save yourself a lot of grief, read the book first, and then start the company. And it's not that difficult. You know, you should choose something that you know well, or that you want to gain a lot of knowledge in and become an expert in a certain clinical condition or a certain unmet clinical need that you're aware of, that you have a lot of passion around. So that's sort of one way to sort of set a direction. But you need to pick something that is a very large market. You know, MedTech is a global, you know, it's a very large market globally. Even if you choose a niche product in the MedTech market, it can be quite sizable. And it needs to be a large problem in that market. So if you have a big market, big problem, something that you know fairly well, that you believe you can build a solution to that problem over time, then you have a direction you can start in. And one of the strategies that Guy Kawasaki promotes in his book is that you can use this area of expertise and you can provide consulting services to start off. So you can form your company, you can provide your expertise to other MedTech companies or to, you know, to certain clients to generate some cash flow to actually help support the company. So you can build out, you know, your proof of concept to that problem that you're trying to solve. And over time, as you build out those solutions and you're basically walking through what they call the valley of death. So you're de-risking your company and walking through this valley of death. So we can go to the next slide and I can describe this valley of death. So I've given a few talks, and usually when I'm in front of an audience and I ask, you know, who knows what the valley of death is, it's really a term that's only known within the venture capital community and within the startup community. As I've learned, it's not a very commonly known term, but it basically describes the journey that you go through as a startup company and as a founder in building your company through to a sustainable and profitable entity. And this is a nice little chart from UC Davis, where it describes, you know, you start off with some research direction, you get some grants, you do some preliminary research, and you discover a potential solution to this big problem. And then you decide to start the company, you get some friends and family money, you start to build out some sort of prototype and proof of concept to show that your solution might work on scale for this large problem. And you go through these various phases. And as you go through these phases, you are burning capital, risk capital. At each milestone that you achieve, you're de-risking the opportunity and you're making it more attractive for investors to come in and fund this pathway of losses through the valley of death. This is a nice little chart, but there's quite a few things that are missing in this chart when it comes to MedTech, because in MedTech you have a higher regulatory set of barriers. So you have to, depending on the class of the product that you're working on, you may have to go through clinical trials and clinical validation and generate evidence that is satisfactory to the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, for them to give you approval to be able to sell the device and use it in patients. And then you may have to gather clinical evidence again in a small clinical trial and show that your device is working better than other devices. And you may need to do other design cycles and adjust the product design. And so all of that takes time and takes capital. And so in MedTech, the depth of the valley of death is just a whole lot deeper than most startups. And that's something you should be aware of. Next slide. So to give you some flavor, we're halfway through the talk. I was trying to leave quite a bit of time at the end for questions, but I want to give you a flavor of some of the things that we're working on and another startup that's coming out of Dalhousie I think is quite exciting. So our company, Halifax Biomedical, one area that we work on, is the next slide, is helping spine surgeons decide what kind of treatment they should provide to patients with chronic low back pain. Chronic low back pain is a huge clinical issue. It affects hundreds of thousands of people every year in Canada and about 5 million people in the US every year. And it's very difficult to know how to treat those patients, and the tools that they use to assess those patients are quite limited. So we're trying to give surgeons better tools to assess patients before they decide what kind of operation to do. So you can go to the next slide. So our solution is to take a traditional X-ray system that is a two-dimensional X-ray system, and we augment that system with another imaging element. And we basically convert a traditional X-ray system into a standing 3D type imaging system that can assess the spine while the patient is standing. And we think that's important to give functional standing information to the surgeon to figure out what is wrong with the spine and how they should best treat it. So we created this augment that adds into existing systems. You can go to the next slide. And we've spent a lot of money and time on automating the processing and trying to make it very, have limited user interaction so that they basically do the imaging, they get the results. I think there's a couple more clicks there, Rob. So we had to develop some statistical approaches to finding the bones in each frame and then build out a three-dimensional dynamic spine assessment of the patient standing. And we believe that this information will lead to better decisions. And that's where we currently are in this process. We have the imaging system approved. We have a few installed, but one of a more recent design that we're looking to launch later this year in many US sites. But that's where we're at, is launching this imaging system to be able to do the imaging to then drive the analytics to inform the surgery. Go to the next slide. So that's one of the imaging products that we have in Halifax Medical. We have another technology in neurosurgery. And go to the next slide. And this technology helps neurosurgeons place wires deep in the brain for the treatment of late-stage Parkinson's disease. It's a technique called DBS. And it's quite difficult to place these wires into the brain in this deep location precisely. The brain moves. There are techniques that use the skull as referencing, but you're kind of flying blind in many ways. And it's difficult to hit this very small rice-sized target zone. So if you go to the next slide. Our solution to that is a very high-speed kind of spectroscopy imaging that can be done through a fiber optic fiber. You go to the next slide. So that's my finger there, and we have a very common type of fiber optic fiber that's used in telecommunications, transmission, and we're able to measure with our platform through this fiber at the end of the fiber in a point up to 100,000 times per second what kind of tissue chemistry is at the end of the fiber. And that information helps us guide in real time that wire down through the brain, helping to avoid certain structures and not damage them, and guide into the target structure to help make the surgery faster, more safe, and also more effective. So getting it in the target zone helps us use less power with the DBS device, helps us, there's a bit different benefits, but basically it makes the surgery a lot more effective. And that's important. It makes it easier to do the surgery. So that's two examples of a problem and a solution that we're developing. Next slide. This technology is just going into first in human trials. So we have some really excellent proof of concept data, first in monkey brain tissue, and then we repeated that proof of concept. We repeat that proof of concept in cadaver tissue of human brain, and now we're going into live human trials. And all this work is being done at a partner organization in Quebec at the University of Laval, Quebec City. So that's preclinical going into early stage clinical trials. And next slide. If you want to switch over, Rob, to the Alentech Microscience PDF file. So I went through the two things that we're involved with in Halifax Medical. This other project is something that I've been involved with for quite some time. It's also coming out of Dalhousie with Dr. Alan Fine, starting a company called Alentech Microscience, I think around 2010. Go to the next slide. So this is a really impressive platform. It deals with a lot of problems, so I'll just cover quickly one main problem. So everyone probably on the call has gotten their blood taken for a blood test. Most blood tests are a type called CBC type test, and it's a really common test. About 500 million tests done each year in the US. And if you've gotten your blood taken, you would have noted that they usually take large volumes of blood, several vials, 4 or 5, to do these really common tests. You have to have a large needle jabbed into your arm. The blood has to go to a central lab, and the results take a lot of hours to get the results back. Go to the next slide. So Alan and or Dr. Fine with the MedTech, they have developed a solution that works as well or better than this current CBC type standard. So they can do this common blood test without a large needle, just using a pinprick of blood, and they can do all of the analytics automatically on a handheld device without any real expertise being needed. To go to the next slide. So this is what the platform looks like. It's basically a handheld imaging device with an imaging chamber. You get a single pinprick of blood. You take that blood, it spreads across a small imaging cell, and you actually take a highly detailed picture with various types of light, and then analyze the blood smear, all done automatically with AI, and that gives the common CBC parameters that you would get from a large blood test. Alan has done a series of proof of concepts. I don't know how many now, but it's more than 15 of various applications where this platform would be able to provide not just the basic kind of blood tests, but also more advanced blood tests. He secured a contract with the Canadian Space Agency to put one of these devices in the International Space Station for research and also doing astronaut blood tests. So it's a pretty interesting platform. Go to the next slide. So just with the current technology, without really any modification, just going through clinical validation, this platform could replace, text is all messed up, but it would replace 125 million of the 500 million tests for CBC in the US every year. So it's a broadly applicable, very attractive technology to have a pinprick of blood. You could take your blood every couple of days if you wanted to, if you had a certain kind of cancer, rather than going and getting your blood drawn and having a large volume of blood taken. If you're a small child, an infant, obviously this technology is very helpful because you can do these analytics with very low volumes of blood. So next slide. And that's basically it. I won't go into the other slides, but I just want to give a flavor of the three kinds of companies that I'm involved with, and I want to leave about 20 minutes left for questions. So we've got 23 minutes, and happy to switch over and answer any questions that anyone has.
Thanks very much, Chad. It's great. So while people are thinking about questions, what were you thinking when you were a master's student and where you would be like 10 years from then? And how close were you?
So when I was a master's student, I had 2 open job offers in Switzerland, and I fully intended to take one of those. That was my idea, and the thought was I always wanted to have a company at some point, and I always wanted to do that in Nova Scotia. It was certainly a goal. Or I want to get a job in Nova Scotia. That was also a very high level goal. And of course, MedTech jobs weren't available in Nova Scotia, and that's why I went to Switzerland. But I intended to go back. Even during my master's, I intended to go back and take those jobs. They were very good paying jobs. I mean, like really, really good. I would have had a bit of a nest egg. But the idea was that I was going to go back to gain enough skills. I had 3 years of amazing experience there, but I want to go back and get another 5 or 10 or whatever it was, so that I could come back and start a company. And so that's what I was thinking during my master's. And as I came down to the end of it, I finished a little bit ahead of my wife, and she was working on her master's. And so I had this little window of time where I could consult. And I started getting pulled into some consulting gigs. And within like 4 weeks, I had more work that I could handle for 3 full-time engineers. And I was like, I don't have to go back to Switzerland. I don't have to actually go get 5 more years to start a company. I can start now because there's such a demand for some of the expertise that I had at the time. So I started Halifax Medical as a IP strategy consulting company and a support organization for certain clinical trials. That's the skills I had. I was doing IP strategy when I worked with Synthes in Switzerland, and so those skills were required with several clients here, and that's what began this journey. So I flew to Switzerland, I turned down the offers, and flew back and started the company.
Wow. So did you feel confident when you turned down those offers? Or did you feel like, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm taking a risk?
It's a lot. I'll just say it's a long time ago, so I can say I forget.
Very good, very good. All right. Well, we have questions from a few from someone. Tuna Gedek, feel free to unmute and ask your question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. First of all, thank you for coming. My question was more based on a follow-up on what you just talked about. At the beginning of the presentation, you mentioned that a MedTech company should ideally be starting in an environment where you already know a lot about the environment or are interested in learning about.
Sure.
And then you also said it should be started as young as possible. And it is, from my end, I'm a second year biomedical engineering student at McGill, and I'm very in the beginning of it. But the way I see it is like those two kind of contradict. Like, okay, I want time, I need time, and I should start like as early as possible. But then also it takes time to become an expert in industry, to identify possibilities, etc. How would you compare these two advices?
Yeah, so I just want to go back to another point I'd made about how innovation is really needed in all areas of medicine. So when you dig down into any specific area, of diagnosis of a condition and then treatment of the condition, there are major gaps in most areas around the diagnosis, around the planning for the intervention, for the therapy itself. These are all, as soon as you start to scratch the surface, you start to just ask questions. Why is this decision made in this way, and what information is that based on, and what's the literature behind it? And as you go through your master's and you focus on a certain area, I think you'll discover that there's a lot of assumptions being made, and there's a lot of development that could happen in most areas. So it's hard to describe this in a general way, but I think that's what you'll find. Certainly you'll find that in areas of like neurosurgery. It's very young. There's still a lot of things being discovered and developed there. It's true for areas of orthopedics, like pediatrics, extremities, and spine. But even if you look at things that are very well developed, like hip replacements and knee replacements, those areas still need innovation as well. So I think if you can find something that you're passionate about and you really want to, like your mother had a certain kind of condition. My mother had osteoarthritis. I think that's why, I drifted towards orthopedics. If you can identify with something and become passionate about it, then it just makes the journey a bit easier, because it's a tough and long journey. So you have to have reasons to continue through the pain.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Are there other questions? I might ask whilst people are thinking. You mentioned that it's the right time now. That was where you started from. And when I went to biomedical engineering, there was not a lot of biomedical technology companies in Canada, although I'm mostly familiar with how many there were in Halifax, which was very, very few. And that seems to have changed dramatically over the last 20 years. And it's coming from all kinds of sectors. It's not from our department necessarily. It's from electrical engineering. It's from out in the hospitals. And one of my thoughts is that we have a very well-trained healthcare system, and they see the gaps everywhere they are in how they want to treat, but they don't have the hands, right? They're not engineers, they're not product developers, but they do have the ideas. And I think it's still yet many gaps, as you mentioned, that can be tapped by young, interested students who want to make a difference to patients.
Yeah, there definitely is, but the ecosystem, it is an ecosystem and it is evolving, right? And so it takes time for companies to mature, to have those companies go public or go through some sort of successful exit, and then for that capital to be reinvested and to further support the ecosystem. So in the last 20 years, I've been back in Canada now for 20 years, which is kind of amazing. But a lot has happened in that time. There was lots of MedTech in the 90s, and lots of VC going into those areas, but they didn't result in many exits. And so we're now just getting to the point where there's been some very significant exits in Canada recently. There's been also new funds created that are privately run, privately funded funds, and that gives in combination with things like the Creative Destruction Lab, that gives active mentorship and involvement in these companies to bring them through their de-risking process. So there's just a lot more now than 20 years ago, and I think we're moving towards being on par with other countries. Obviously, there are other countries that are much more advanced in their ecosystem development. Switzerland is one, Israel is one, Sweden, UK, France, and of course the United States. And the US, benefits from a lot of innovation that happens in Canada. So we just need to be better at capturing the value. I think we're pretty good at creating it. So.
Very, very good point. We do have a question, great question from Young Wang. Thank you for the fantastic, I'll read it, it's in the chat. Thank you for the fantastic talk. I'm just wondering, would VC firms or the public get cold feet after the Theranos scandal for innovation like the Prospector platform? And he has a second part, and how to persuade the general public that the certain innovation is actually beneficial for their well-being. So yeah, I guess messaging.
Yeah, communications is critical in MedTech. It's the most important thing is understanding the unmet clinical need, and there are certain needs that are clearly unmet, but it's hard to determine if how important they are. So if you go back to the Theranos scandal, I think that's a great example of a company that was working on something that was really quite exciting and quite important, and something that people really identified with. Oh, I would love to go to my pharmacy and get my blood taken with a prick of blood. And isn't that amazing? And that's what drove their insane value and gave them all this money to do it. Unfortunately, they were fraudulent, and they forgot to do something called the science behind what they were trying to do, and they got trapped in this over-promising and not delivering. And I can see that Alan is on the call, but the difference with Alan is that he's taken 12 years to do the science and to also really patent his area rigorously and have, I think it's 36 awarded patents now that underpins the technology. And there are many other firms, it's 8 or 9 of them that are currently working on a similar platform that are trying to achieve this similar thing, because those 500 million people would rather have a drop of blood taken than many vials. So I don't think there's a lot of convincing that needs to happen there. So at the end of the day, I believe that the clinical need is what drives success. And you're going to have people that, that fail at the execution, that don't get enough money to, fulfill that need, but the need doesn't go away. And so the opportunity will remain as long as the need is there.
All right, great question, great answer. Are there any other questions from the students? Or Young Wing says, thank you so much for that answer. Well, if there are no other further questions, then I'd like to thank you very much, Chad, for sharing some of your time today with mostly trainees in the audience, but all of us.
I think Tuna has one more question there.
Oh, there is another question.
Yeah.
Tuna.
Hey, if there's one asking, I have a final question. Well, again, as I mentioned, since I'm quite young compared to, well, perhaps the other people, I just have a question. Would you do something else differently other than reading The Art of Start if you were to go back to the beginning, maybe your undergrad or your master's?
I thought about that. The answer really is no. I mean, certainly there are things I would definitely do differently, mistakes that I would not have made if I knew I was going to make them. But I think that all of the decisions that I've made, back then and along the way are always based on the best information I had at the time, and then applying a set of principles against those decisions. And I'm quite comfortable with those decisions. I wish they would have turned out a little bit better, in some cases than others, but there's a lot of learning that comes with making mistakes and then trying not to repeat them. And then on the other side, I've seen this system around me, the ecosystem develop, and that's really encouraging. And that's why I think it is the best time. It's certainly the best time in the last 20 years to start a MedTech company in Canada. And this is where I want to have a MedTech company. I think there's lots of other factors globally that make you really appreciate this location to raise a family and build a company. And so all my decisions have allowed me to build my company here, and I'm quite happy with that result so far.
Thank you.
Wow, I was nearly calling it a day, but in the 6 minutes we have left, we got one other question. So Justin, do you have a question you want to bring forward?
Yeah, sure. At what point, Chad, do you think you have an idea that's worth pursuing? Like when do you make the call and say, okay, well, let's do this, or let's make a company around this, versus nah, let's pass up the opportunity?
If you apply a basic filter, well, there's a long and short answer to that question, I guess. The short answer is, if you are really sure that the need is unmet, so you analyze this clinical need, there's just no solution for it. Early detection of pancreatic cancer. Most pancreatic cancer is detected very late stage, and when you're in the late stage, when you have late stage pancreatic cancer, the survival rate is very, very low. So you can point to that as, okay, that is clearly an unmet need. Having a method for early diagnosis of that type of cancer is very beneficial, because if you get early diagnosis, the survival rate is much, much higher. So I had a friend who died of pancreatic cancer. He was just a little bit older than I am now. Had 2 kids the same age as my kids. I can identify with that unmet need, right? And And the reality is, once he discovered that he had that, then they, gave him 6 months or whatever, and I think he, died about 8 months later. So that's an unmet need. But so you could say, like, I'm going to dedicate the rest of my life to solving that need, and you could look at all the different technologies and bring them to bear in that problem. But you may never solve that problem. So that might be a research area and not a commercial area. You may have a novel test for detecting certain elements in the breath that would say, hey, this pancreatic cancer is there, and you may have research that supports that you can detect these kind of things very early on. And so then you may say, well, I'm going to dedicate the next 5 years to really advance this research. And if I get enough evidence that this could work in every single patient, then you say, I'm going to take the leap and start the company. So it's situation by situation, but I think the easiest answer is just, is the unmet clinical need really there? Because most companies fail because they just didn't pick something that was important enough to the market, and that's the thing that needs to be checked off for sure, and then move forward into the rest of the analysis.
Awesome. Thanks, Jed.
You're welcome.
Really quick one from Zachary. Am I ready after a computer science undergrad to start a neurotech company, or should I continue my training academically?
I don't know. I think you can latch onto the fear that you're never good enough, and that you need more training, or you can try to form a team that is complementary to your deficiencies, right? So most successful companies have founding teams that you build some of these other areas. So you could partner with a neuroscientist, you could do it in that way. But that's a whole other journey, and I really can't provide a lot of advice on that. But I think that's that's one way to get around that that problem. But again, back to that one of the points on my slide, which is you need to have some real passion around that area, and you need to know enough about that subject to be somewhat dangerous. And then you can take time to learn. And if you have a computer science degree and you're really good at image processing or automation of image processing, there's lots of work out there that you can consult and provide value to other MedTech teams, generate revenue, run a company as a consulting business, and take all of your margin and plow it into your own education of that subject, or plow it into other staff that are advancing that area. So it's a very successful model, and I encourage anyone to pursue that. And if you read The Art of the Start, that's one of the tidbits in there that's very helpful. So
awesome. Well, I think we'll call it the end of the great seminar. So thank you very much, Chad, for doing this.
You're welcome. Yeah, I hope it was helpful.
Yeah, we'll be in touch. All right. Thanks, everyone.